right, so we are working through the strategic planning process. So the first step in the strategic planning process is to evaluate current performance. And so as we're working through the strategic planning process, let's pretend that you are in charge of Tim Hortons. So you are Tim Hortons management or leadership. Evaluate current performance. So what do we know about Tim Hortons? We know that they sell coffee and they sell donuts. They also are selling Timbits. At the time of making this video, they are moving into selling rice bowls. They also have sandwiches and soup. They have canned drinks. They have cookies. They have bagels. If we look at Tim Hortons in terms of the identity of the organization, Tim Hortons, when we talk about Tim Hortons, Canadians see Tim Hortons as their company, right? The culture of Canada and the culture of Tim Hortons are intertwined, right? So when you think about being Canadian, we often think Tim Hortons. And so I think about as Tim Hortons expands into the US, it's in the Philippines, it's in the Middle East, right? Tim Hortons is spanning the globe. Well, if you're a Canadian seeing Tim Hortons in New York, right, it feels a little like home. Like this is your company. So there's an attachment, a national identity tied to the organization. Well, when we think about Tim Hortons, we think about, that's the place you go after you play hockey. That's you go after an event. We think about our cold winter sports. We go to Tim Hortons for a nice cup of coffee afterwards. If you're retired, you go to Tim Hortons to sit and chat with other people who are retired. So it's a culture in terms of it's a place you go and you get together and you hang out with friends and family. We can think about the organizational culture in terms of giving back to the community. They have fundraisers, smile cookies. They give money. There's a Tim Hortons camp to help kids. There's a number of where they're giving to the community. So that creates that culture of the organization. So we've evaluated our organization. We've talked about some of the products they create. Now we need to conduct an environmental scan. So we talk about an environmental scan. We're looking at the external environment, outside forces and institutions that affect the organization's performance. So we have political conditions, economic conditions, sociocultural conditions, technological conditions, environmental conditions, and legal conditions. And so this will help us create what is called a PESTLE. And when you take introductory marketing, you'll talk about creating PESTLEs. And in our strategic management courses, you'll also do a PESTLE. So let's flesh that out a bit more. So when we talk about environmental factors that are political, and I'm just going to move my face over a little bit here. We're talking about government policies. We're talking about political stability, corruption. We're talking about foreign trade policies, tax policies, what's happening with labor laws. So legal conditions here and political are going to be a little intertwined. Trade restrictions, government funding, wars, political relationships. Now, if you are working along with me as part of our course, I'm just going to fast forward a bit here. We're going to ask you to create a PESTLE for Tim Hortons. So I'm going to give you a couple here, but your job is to flesh out the PESTLE in more detail. So if we're looking at Tim Hortons in terms of political, we could think about the fact that Tim Hortons is expanding into other countries. So if we look at companies like Burger King that expanded into Russia, there were some challenges there, right? Because what happens when you have trade policies that no longer allow trade with Russia, when we have sanctions because Russia has attacked Ukraine, well, that creates problems for your organization in terms of the ability to expand, to grow, to even maintain the business because of political uncertainty, instability, war, and restrictions on what you can do. So we have seen a number of companies divest from Russia because of the politics. If we're looking at Tim Hortons, Well, what countries are they expanding in? Are they stable? Are they ones where war might break out? Are they ones where we might have issues in terms of getting supplies to that location because of disruptions with trade? So we can look at those aspects. Maybe the operations are subsidized, so maybe there's government funding for that type of business that we're doing. Then we have economic. So we look at economic growth. Where are we in the business cycle? Is the economy growing or shrinking? Maybe we have a business that doesn't do well when people's income goes down. So when the economy contracts and people get laid off, then they buy less of our product. Maybe with Tim Hortons, since donuts are cheaper, when the economy is not doing well, maybe our business actually does better. So what's the strength of consumer spending? Maybe we have a product where people have to borrow money to buy, so maybe household debt is a big concern. If we are bringing in materials in order to produce our good or provide our service, we have to think about exchange rates. In terms of company expansion, if we're going to get a new location, we have to think about interest rates. How can we get access to loans? We can think about the unemployment rate. How hard is it to hire new workers, to keep good workers? Do they have lots of choice? So there's a number of economic factors we can consider. Then we look at social. What is happening in terms of the population? So if we look at where Tim Hortons is located, we have lots of Tim Hortons in Canada. Look at the towns that Tim Hortons is in. What's happening to the population there? If we're seeing an influx in terms of immigrants moving into our town, are they more or less likely to eat at Tim Hortons? Maybe there's other demographic changes. Maybe there's a change in people's age. Does that change whether or not they want our particular product? Is there a change in career attitudes? Are we seen as an organization that individuals want to come work for? What about how people feel about us relative to safety, relative to health consciousness? You know, donuts are not healthy and society is more focused on healthy lifestyles. That's not good for our organization. Are there other lifestyle attitudes? Are there cultural barriers? So if we want to expand into other nations, is there a national culture that would support and encourage the growth of our organization? Or is it an uphill battle because the product we sell is not something that culturally they normally eat or enjoy? And what's the brand and company image? Are we seen in a positive light or in a negative light? Then we can look at technological impacts. Are there incentives for us to incorporate more technology? What's the level of innovation that's expected in our industry? How much automation? How much research and development? How much technological change is happening around us? So if we look at Tim Hortons, for example, we see the competitors, Starbucks, even Subway and Quiznos now have apps where you can order ahead of time and just show up and pick up your items. So we're seeing that there's big technological change in fast food. People want to order from their phone and just swing by and pick it up. Even the drive-thru is not fast enough in terms of placing the order. What kind of technological awareness do we have? We need to know what kind of technology is out there and the ways that it could be helpful in terms of our production, in terms of our purchasing process, and so on. Do we need to provide more flexibility in the way that our people work? Maybe they're going to work more remote. And so what is the role of technology to the organization? Then we have environmental, and this can be in terms of weather and climate, environmental policies, focuses on waste reduction, recycling, pollution. Are we using packaging that is more environmentally friendly, right? We see that companies, McDonald's, Tim Hortons, right, getting rid of straws or having to replace them with cardboard straws. How well is that going over? Is that actually reducing our waste? We see grocery stores getting rid of plastic bags. So what is the expectations in terms of our commitment to recycling, to waste reduction, to pollution? And then what's the impact environmentally on the organization? If droughts and climate change mean less coffee beans, that's going to make our costs go up. So we need to look at and evaluate what's happening with our organization. Then the last one we have in our PESTLE is legal. So what's changing in terms of laws and regulations that might impact our business? So antitrust laws, are there limitations? Maybe we were considering, buying a supplier, so having more vertical integration. Maybe we were considering buying a competitor, more horizontal integration. What kind of laws are restricting what we can do and who we can partner with? We can look at copyrights, we can look at patents. There are laws in terms of labor law, human rights, discrimination laws. So how is that impacting us in terms of our ability to recruit and retain workers? What's changing in terms of health and safety? So are we seeing increased inspections? With COVID, for example, is there now expectations in terms of worker distance from each other, masking at work? Those types of requirements can impact the organization. We see more and more issues with data protection and consumer protection. One of the challenges that Tim Hortons is having is that their app tracks people, and it tracks people not just when they go to Tim Hortons, but when they go to the competitors. So it was letting Tim Hortons know every time you went to Starbucks or McDonald's. And so this level of tracking and this level of data about the individuals has become legal issues. And so that's one of the challenges that Tim Hortons is fighting, is lawsuits related to that. So we're looking at the external environment, these outside forces that are impacting the organization, and ultimately we're going to need to look at how these external impacts can threaten us, can be opportunities for us, and then we'll use those to help us develop strategies and goals for our organization.